Hello, my name is Mr. Dore. I was an old student working in the field with Bernard Saladin. I thank everyone present here today, and I'm also thank Bernard for three things. Mostly in 1965, he was the first one to send me to Guatak. He invited me to a research project in Guatak. That was his village. It was the first village that he visited in the north long before me. And then, second point, when he was doing his master's degree, he suggested me to do a PhD in ethno-linguistics on Inuit language, on the Inuit language in Paris. And he told me that they have a big house in Paris and his parents were renting rooms. So that was very convenient to me. And thirdly, when I finished a PhD in 1972, Bernard was working at the University Laval and as a director and professor. He insisted that I would also get a job as a teacher and at Laval University. In this new department that was created, the new faculty, they were hiring new teachers, especially in Inuit studies and indigenous studies. So I got a job at Laval University, and I've been here for 40 years. So most of it is thanks to Bernard. Guillaume Saladin, the son of Bernard Saladin, he's going to be the first presenter in the name of our Lord. Hello, everyone. Today is it's an event that my father would have enjoyed being here. Often at the end of his life, we would talk about we have these big gatherings, and this is one of them that he would love to join. So thank you. Thank you for being here. We're gathered here in his memory. Some of you, you've known me since I was a child because as a kid, I was here at the Koneng. As a child, I was often here, more time as a child than as an adult. I was often drawing outside in the hall, waiting for my dad to finish his classes. I have so many memories. It's been so many years that I haven't been here. Louis-Jacques, Lise, they've seen me growing, so I'm very touched that we meet again. It's amazing. I was talking with Lisa earlier. The first time we talked, we were doing the artistic project. I asked for fun, and then all these years later, we meet again. It's almost like meeting an old family member. It's really, I'm touched. We're here today because my father passed away in February. We are together today to honor his memory, and February was the end of a cycle, a long and beautiful life. And maybe one day it's going to be my children that will give a speech when I'm leaving, but when I will be gone. I'm very touched because it's about the cycle of life, this death, being born and reborn. These are the great themes. Sorry. These are the great themes that my father explored throughout his life, and he's part of it. Without knowing it at the time, I was kind of like Obelix. I was born in the cauldron and the magic potion. I had this great chance, this opportunity to grow up in the north. I also received a name. It took Zajrakt. At the time, I didn't know the meaning behind that name. As a kid, I was going hunting with the other kids while my father was interviewing the elders. And we didn't go to the village or in the, we wanted to go to camps because they were more genuine. So I was brought with my father and I was playing long summers with the sun that was just spinning in the sky. I had the chance to live a little bit what the young people, young Inuit were living, to live in, to go hunting, to live in the wild. I lived all this. And that is my present, the gift I received from my father, and I'm hoping to transfer that gift to my own children. I was really lucky to have had this childhood. And today I'm conscious of the importance of this name that I received, an Inuit name, and it impacted my life. In 1998, we started a project called Art Cirque. 1 month, we would go to the north with the young, and with Inuits, we were sharing hunting and traditional knowledge, and I was sharing them with the other artists. We were talking about circus knowledge. We were just exchanging knowledge, and a few years I was asking myself, where is it going? So it's 1 month. It was good, but it I wanted to be more involved in the north, so I decided to move from in 2005. I moved from the south to the north. Then one night I was in the north and I called my mother, and we were talking. I was talking with my mom, and she said, if you had not received the name Ituk Sachuat, would you be living in the north today? And that struck a chord. I never thought of it. And it made me think, what was the impact of my name that I received, my Inuit name? And then I realized if I had only been Guillaume Saladin, I wouldn't be living in the north today. And then everything kind of fell into place. All these elders giving their name to the next generation, it creates links. And I was part of this network. As a kid, they brought me along. And all of a sudden, I realized my life was more meaningful thanks to my name, my Inuit name. In 2005, I realized it, and it gave me strength and patience to continue the project, to continue to live in the North. And that's when I met Annie, my girlfriend, and then we raised our children. And that's why in 2025, the project is still going on. It's still going strong. I still do like back and forth, but the people at Ingalik, they took over. We have 7 employees. It is a success. It's amazing. 12th, February 12th, my father passed away. And then there was a big fire that very day. It is, I'm still processing all of this. I don't know what it means exactly. Today, my children are with me. They received Inuit names too. It links them to Inuit families, to Inuit friends. And I hope one day they too will realize the importance of their name. They can pull strength out of that Inuit name and they can look forward to make their own future. I was able to have a future thanks to the childhood that my father gave me. Community is built over many generations, and it's a privilege to be part of it. And Inuit, In the village I live in, people know my father, they know my children. There is this trust. Father didn't make a faux pas. There were many white people that made mistakes and that broke the trust in the North, but father was not one of them. And that's why I feel comfortable. I'm welcome in this village. I'm part of this village. And that's why my children also have a life there, and all other artists also welcomed. This legacy is a living legacy from my father. It's this viewpoint, a different perspective to my father had this famous image with the Icarus, the igloo and the celestial arc, and to move from one layer to the other, to see it from the child to the top, or from the sky to the bottom. These are links to nature, to the tundra, to the animals. And I think we would, in the Western world, we would gain from this experience, from these points of views. I hope that the work of my father is going to be an inspiration for many generations of anthropologists and also inspire new generations of Inuits. In the north, there are many changes. There's this desire to regain their language. And I believe my father has accumulated many archives, audio archives, and these archives are going to be very precious, even more in the future. We have preserved a culture. Thank you, all of you, to work with in the project of my father in your own way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guillaume. For the questions, we will wait to the end. After all the speakers will take the questions. The second person is Françoise Morin, Bernard's spouse, who will talk about a nonconformist, multi-situated, and committed anthropology, which summarizes who Bernard was. Will be a complement to what Guillaume said. It will be a description of two sides of how Bernard was as an anthropologist. First of all, thank you to Guillaume and Jacques Doré for organizing this roundtable to honor Bernard. Thank you so much, because I know it requires time, organization. So I called my talk, as Louis-Jacques said, because I think it is three facets of Bernard's anthropological approach that are pretty inhabitual and interesting. I was filing his archives, and there were so many. I found a draft that was titled Being Born in Inuit Arctic, written around 2013. And in the first line, it was written, the nonconformism of the birth in Arctic is different, off kilter, but the one also speaking of it is nonconformist. I consider myself nonconformist in several ways that are not unrelated. What are these personal differences he speaks of? Because he goes on to speak more about it in the text. He was born left-handed, as some know. So he says, I belong to 10% of the population who are left-handed and clumsy from the point of view of the overwhelming majority. I was still different when I was forced to write with my right hand. In an interview for the Socio magazine, an online magazine, this was in 2015, he writes about his frustrated left-handedness. It is probably thanks to this difference that I have been able to detect certain aspects of social life that people with a traditional education do not perceive. 15 years later, I found another unpublished text on the Inuit imagination, written around 2006. Bernard wrote about his frustrated left-handedness. Isn't there something in this frustration that is analogous to the gender frustration among the Inuit, with the effect of a certain fullness that enables one to see what others do not see and to mediate because of the overlap between right and left, question mark. Second personal difference or nonconformist that Bernard speaks of, he says that very young, he became interested in his family history. He was around 9 or 10. He became fascinated by the family oral tradition about his surname, so Saladin. The legend says that his ancestor, the Knight of Angler, who was setting off for the Third Crusade, some of you might have heard about this. So instead of playing football like all other boys his age, he became his family's genealogist and was quickly confronted, he writes, with family myths present in several ancestral lines and discovered that a family tree is a cultural construct with cut branches and grafted branches. He adds that this is undoubtedly what has led me to the ethnography of kinship among the Inuit. But the ethnography of kinship that he undertook among the Inuit was an unconventional, nonconformist one because his personal differences led him to observe and understand social realities differently from many anthropologists. Of course, he encountered a certain lack of understanding on the part of his research supervisors and colleagues. Here are a few examples. The first misunderstanding he mentions in his 2006 article on the Inuit naming system. He writes, my first days with the Inuit from 1956 to 1962 revealed to me that behind a relatively simple kinship nomenclature lay a very complex system of usage due to the symbolic equivalence of homonyms. In fact, one inherited the identity and parental status of one's namesake, the person from whom one had received one's name, usually a deceased person. With this identity, one also inherited all of the names and the namesakes that had previously been used to address other people. So in short, he realized the extreme complexity of the social organization that he was describing. In the manuscript, he then submitted to Mr. Belixi his master's thesis advisor at the Université of Montreal, in 1962. A few months later, he was in Paris for his military service and received a message from Balixi saying that he questioned the veracity of his data concerning kinship, eponymy, links with midwives, and the cross-dressing of children on the grounds that none of the classic monographs on the Inuit really mentioned it. Bernard, therefore, set aside this information and wrote a much more traditional master's thesis on the traditional Inuit social organization, which was this time accepted. Second example, illustrating his anthropological nonconformism and the misunderstanding he faced. So after completing his military service and research training, he did the CFRE at the Musée de l'Homme and the EPRAS and the EPHE. So he had to enroll in a doctoral program in 1964. At the time, the only Arctic specialist who could supervise him was Mallory, who became a close friend. So Mallory encouraged him to choose a major socio-political topic in Inuit leadership. After his first year of study, that they do every time they start a PhD program, Bernard went to see Mallory to ask to change his thesis subject, proposing to transcribe, translate, and analyze a manuscript written in syllabic script by an exceptional Inuit woman, Miti Ardrut. Father Le Chat had entrusted him with Michil's first notebooks during his stay in 1961. But Mallory refused to change the subject of his thesis, saying, "The Inuit are an oral society. They don't write." Lévi-Strauss, who was very close to Uberma, got him out of this impasse by transferring him to religious studies, where Evelyn Lotfak welcomed Bernard into her program on the Arctic peoples of Siberia. So he wrote his thesis with her based on Mitiarjuk's manuscript. Because by working with her for nearly 18 months, from the notebooks she wrote, then in syllabic script, he not only learned the language, but also discovered the famous third social sex. Third example of misunderstanding and nonconformism. This was during his presentation at the Lévi-Strauss seminar in January 1971. At the time, he'd been at CNRS for 6 years and was due to report on his latest field research before returning to the Audet. While preparing his presentation, he was having a hard time, wondered what links might exist between cross-dressing, sex reassignment at birth, and eponymy, between the ritual circumambulation around a new igloo and the apparent trajectory of the sun, moon, and starry sky. To relax, he decides to go to a swimming pool near his home. And while he was swimming, he realizes that one must adopt the point of view of the fetus floating in the maternal womb to understand at ontogenesis, but also cosmogenesis and social organization of the Inuit. So he chose as a title of his presentation with Lévi-Strauss, "From Delivery to Landing, an attempt to explain social reproduction among the Inuit." Deliverance referred to birds and docking to the rite of passage into adulthood for Inuk, who using their first kayak had to turn 3 times in the apparent direction of the sun and return to dock while their betrothed grabbed the bow of the kayak to help them disembark. He could then take her as his wife and start a family. Bernard presented all these ideas in a first draft of his famous diagram showing the uterus, the igloo, and the sky in analogical relationship on 3 scales. While several colleagues applauded him, Claude Tardif, some of you must know him, a former professor at EPRAS, Africanist, he was highly critical. He asked them, what proof do we have that everything you've told us isn't just pure speculation from your brain? Bernard was again very taken aback, but Lévi-Strauss came to his rescue saying, I was often criticized for this at the beginning of my career. But the least we can say after hearing you is that your presentation has great heuristic value in that it gives meaning to much of the data presented in your predecessors' monographs on the Inuit, which is most often included in appendices or without interpretation. Bernard decided from then on to film his interviews in order to respond to this type of criticism. These 3 examples, which mark the beginning of Bernard's academic career, clearly show that by adopting new perspectives and a different methodology from his colleagues, he gained access to unknown aspects of Inuit culture that bothered some anthropologists. A second side of him is multi-situated anthropology. In the end of the 80s, Bernard sought to test his theoretical model of the third sex and verify his hypotheses about cross-dressing. Wanted to test them among other indigenous groups with shamanistic traditions or who were still practicing shamanism. This went against the grain of dominant ethnographic practices, which favored monographic studies of a single community or ethnic group. So the anthropologist was the specialist of a community or group. It was at this time that our paths crossed and our personal differences, nonconformisms, somehow matched, because I recognized myself in his model of the third social sex, and since he defined himself as a third gender, so we were in a way complementary. In 1986, he was trying to compare with other groups. So I was returning from a long stay in Peruvian Amazon, where I had been working with the Shipico Conibo, who live along the Ucayali. At this time, this community was undergoing a revival of its identity, of which shamanism was an integral part. I studied their political mobilization and their territorial and cultural claims. And to this end, I conducted numerous interviews with their leaders, among them Quetzalcoatl, a Shipibo, who had a training in shamanism. He was part of a family of shamans who had resisted pressure from various Catholic, evangelical, and Adventist missionaries. At the end of the 80s, so I met Bernard, he proposed this comparison, and I accepted to participate in his research that had three components: the Inuit, the Shipibo-Konibo, the Yukagirs, and the Chukchi in Siberia. Inaudible? So I will focus mainly on the Amazonian region because I don't have enough time to elaborate it, where we were able to collect many biographies of several shamans who recounted their apprenticeship as first Onania, because with Shipibo there are three types. So Onanya, Shipibo, and the other was inaudible, I'm sorry. So the Onaya treat with plants that you must know, like Ayahuasca. The Maraya are great shamans who can travel to other worlds. And for this, they meet with a spirit woman, a Chai Goni, with whom they live as spouses and with who they have spirit children. They form a type of second family. The mystical wife of the Chaikuni then becomes the shaman's main spirit and manages his relationship with the spiritual world. During a second trip in 1990, so the first one in 94, the second one was in 96, we returned to study further the female shaman. So there are less of them, but they do exist. I'll quote the testimony of one of them, Panchin Beka, who I got to know quite well. She was Onanya. She was around 60 years old. She was trained in shamanism by her maternal uncle, himself a Mariah from a Chekoni family. She married a Shipibo, and one day she was visited in a dream by a Chekoni who became her husband, her spiritual husband. She had a dream in which a miniature girl was placed in her vagina, and her spirit husband forbade her from having sexual relations with any human, otherwise the child would be born deformed. She thus found out that she was pregnant by her spirit husband, and she gave birth to a girl nicknamed Yoshin Mage, child of the spirit, who we got to know very well. So with this example of Banshin Beka, we can deduce that in terms of alliance and Shipibo Konimbo men and women are in a symmetrical relationship when they have a wedding with a spirit, but in terms of filiation, in the case of a man who marries a spirit woman, they will procreate invisible children. But in the case of a woman who marries a spirit man, she will give birth to visible human children. This team of the mystical marriage of shamans, of Shipigo Konibo, really excited Bernard. He wanted to revisit this team with the Inuit, this theme of mystical marriages with Iriret or Tariaksuk women from Clyde River who, like the Chegoni, are invisible humans. This research that I called multi-situated in reference to Marcus's article, of course, that was published around the same time in 1995. So this allowed us to better understand and analyze two shamanic worlds, and this stimulated Bernard to deepen his knowledge of Inuit shamanism. The last facet of him, okay, I'll go faster, but I can stop also if needed. No. summarize, perhaps? Well, summarize, I don't know. So unlike many anthropologists of my generation who accumulated, so that of some of us here, that of Bernard, we accumulated data and adopted an extractivist approach to then write articles and books about particular peoples. Bernard had a completely different conception of anthropology and its practice. He created, in 1970, with Louis-Jacques Doré, the term inuxiotit to describe the social anthropology research group at Laval University, whose goal was not only to study and raise awareness about Inuit culture, but also to help Inuits to preserve and recover their identity. The team of researchers that formed around Bernard sought to make the knowledge accessible. So this knowledge that was gathered from those who held it accessible to also as many Inuit as possible. It was not a question of to investigate the Inuit, but rather to work with them to gain a better understanding of their culture with the aim to strengthen their identity and support their economic and territorial claims. So with the Inukshuitut Katimavit Association in 1974, they organized the Inuit Studies Congresses. Little by little, the Inuit began to participate in them. The last one in Winnipeg was largely organized by them. The association also started the Etude Inuit study, so Inuit Studies, first published in 1976, 77, and then the Inuit contributed to certain issues. There was one by Mary Simons and Delisamu, two prominent Inuit political figures at the moment, about collective rights and powers. So Bernard also wanted his own anthropological work to benefit the Inuit. So he donated to the Inuit Cultural Centre of Montreal all his films, genealogical research, all his archives. He wanted Inuit to use them to retrace their ancestry, affiliation, to know the names of their ancestors, to gather their traditional knowledge, to hear their voices. So he also wanted to promote Inuit literature and self-history. This already in 1965. The project originated with Mitu who was encouraged to write in syllabics a story she invented called Sanak. This gave Bernard an idea to give notebooks to some Inuits to write their own stories because he realized that they were much more prolific and cooperative when we asked them to answer questions on paper. So he developed informant writer's method, his famous method, and and within 2 years he enlisted the participation of some 50 informant writers in 8 villages, and now we have a very significant corpus, some in syllabic, still, some of it still left to explore. This was digitized, and with Louis Jacques, he started a toponymy survey in Nunavik. 600 of the 350 place names they collected were made official by the Quebec Toponymy Commission. However, he regretted that the memory of the places occupied before the Inuit settled in villages was being lost, particularly the knowledge of sacred sites. He wrote, Inuit mythology is inscribed in the territory. And here again, knowledge is being lost. So he proposed creating a database to tackle this issues. Another issue he was greatly concerned with was the Inuit naming system. He criticized in an article from 2006 the policies that killed identity erasing policies by missionaries and then governments who impose surnames at the expense of traditional names. He noted that younger generations often do not know their traditional names. He saw that they would rather identify with hockey players. They would number their they were tattoo their numbers on their forearms and ask people to call them by those numbers. In this context, with Louis Jacques, he asked to revive personal names in two villages, Iqlulik and Sanikulak, where they had to collect all personal names of the population with the eponyms and circumstances of their naming. This had a lot of success among youth, and again, they created a digital bank in the villages to preserve these data. I wanted to also highlight Bernard's commitment in the legal field. I won't elaborate, but he often defended before judges their cultures by showing, for example, in the famous Upkick Deer case, that intergenerational adoption was an Inuit custom and it had to be respected. To conclude quickly, I will say something about his international commitment. I'm a little responsible of this because when we met in 1986, I had discovered the working group on the rights of indigenous populations in Geneva in the UN that had existed since 1982. And I discovered by following Amazonian indigenous leaders that had created the Koika, which is the equivalent of this, but in the Amazon. So they wanted to see what they were doing in Geneva. So this is where the notion of indigenous people was first spoken of.
1988, Bernard followed me and we fought for the recognition of the indigenous rights. For 30 years, we were the intermediary between, we were representing indigenous leaders and from around the world. We were often giving advice to, for example, the French leader. We explained why it was important to adopt the famous declaration in 2007. This period was very important. Now I'm looking through my notes. There we go. And I would like to end with two other anthropologists. We created the JIPTA, which is the International Group for Work for the Indigenous People in 2004, which was related to what was happening in Denmark, well, to what was happening in Greenland. We were working with Spanish and English, and all the French speakers were a bit confused and lost. So we created this GITPA group to translate documents. We're interpreting important documentations on this topic. And we also organize a coordination between the indigenous people and the French speakers. We would gather people in Quebec. And also Lisa was involved in this project. I will stop here. I hope I convinced you of the importance of Bernard Saladin's contribution. Thank you so much, Françoise. Next, we have Michel Audet, who was an old student and a collaborator of Bernard. He's going to talk about the as a man orchestra. Try to be concise if you can. So at home, it was within 13 minutes. So let's see how it goes. First and foremost, I'm also left-handed. They force me to write with my right hand, and I have a son whose name is Guillaume. Bernard, a one-man band. That's the name I gave to my piece. It does it's echoing what Françoise was saying, but more anchored of what was happening on in the field and what was happening at the Laval University. Bernard was very active at the university. I'm not going to do like Françoise to go way back in the past, but I'm going to cover a period between 1967 and 1974. So in 1967, we've met and we stopped working together in 1974 in August. So that will be between 1967 and 1974. That's going to be the period I'm covering. And I'm going to explain two major contributions that Bernard did. Of course, the Inuit contribution, and then his work as an anthropologist at the Université Laval. So in 1967, March, that's where it started. March 1967. I was interested in Bernard. I got in touch with him. He was in Montreal at the time. I wanted to check with him if he was willing to talk about anthropology and if I had a chance to either enroll at the Université Laval in anthropology or in Montreal. That evening, he convinced me that it was a good idea, that I should study in anthropology. And he also informed me that in the following weeks, he might have an invitation to become a professor the following autumn in 1967, that he would become a teacher at Laval University. So that's how we said goodbye. In April 1967, Bernard received the invitation from Laval University. He accepted it, and then he told me about it. So on my side, I also received the admission offer from Laval University. And that's when in September, the following September, we were together again. Fall 1967, Bernard came to the university to sign the contract. And then he proposed a process classes because he was doing many things. So while the autumn semester, he would continue studying in Paris, teach at the university during the winter semester, and then go to the north in the summer. At the time, it was a very beginning of the anthropology faculty at Laval University. We had about like 35 students, 3 full-time teachers. Many of our professors were just temporary. They would just come for one semester to teach just a few times. There was only one research that started in 1965 under the direction of Marc de la Tremblay. The title was Ethnography of Northeast of St. Lawrence. CHRS started at the time. The title was Ethnography of the Eskimo people. When nowadays we wouldn't say Eskimo, we'd say Inuit. 68, Bernard came to Laval University. He gave a class on the Inuit. It's not with Inuits, but it was about Inuit people. He received the financing that he was asking for. Louis Jean, among other things, and myself, we had enough money to do a research and go to villages, one in Nunavut, one in Nunavut. We were in the field until the end of the summer. We had to do sampling, demographic sampling. We looked at hunting routes and other information. We made a lot of recordings, filming. We gathered a lot of information. We collected a lot of data. Gradually, we had a lot of material recordings from the culture, from the language, from the knowledge. Then gradually, from 3 professors, now there was 5 professors. More and more research was done. There was also the Latin American studies, the African studies. 1968, Bernard left again for the autumn season. In 1968, at the autumn fall, there was a growth in terms of research activity. In May 1968, in France and Paris, many students were on strike. They wanted to have more professors. They wanted to create a new department, a new faculty. They wanted to have more training, more activities. At the University of Laval, we also had a training and research project. Summer 1969, we were back in the field. We were doing more research. The university hired a 6th professor, a specialist of the North Coast, and also of vegetable, so the plants and nature. So you could see, you can feel that the University Laval was getting more and more active in the research projects. In December, there was a conflict between anthropologists and sociologists. Sociologists got expulsed. February 1970. Bernard was back as he was doing from Paris. He had a mandate to study what was the situation of anthropology at the University of Laval. He wrote a memoir. In March 1970. Over 30 students asked. One of the professors stopped teaching. This professor was not for the creation of a new faculty. If I remember well, about four teachers and professors, we met Bernard Saladin. We were trying to calm the situation. At the end of this reunion, Mark finally accepted the creation of a new department, a new faculty. We were waiting for the report. Bernard and his colleague were working very hard to work in collaboration with other professors. Summer 1970, we had many students and professors in the field doing the research. We created a new center for material and documentations put together since 1968. There was a big report that was given in 1970. Autumn 1970. Researchers were back at the university. Bernard went to Paris. We were a large group studying about the Inuit situation. In October 1970, there is this creation of anthropology faculty. 53 students, 6 professors full-time, and 4 guest professors. Nunavut, Mexico, and Africa, there were many studies happening at the same time. In 1971, in January, Bernard comes back for his winter session. At the time, I believe he was done with his PhD in Paris. He didn't defend it. So that was not done yet in January 1971. So Louis-Jacques, he says that there's in May that he graduated, got his diploma. So it's 4 or 5 months that is a bit a mystery. But while during that time, he was teaching at the university. He he went he went to Inuit, November 1971. Bernard was nominated. He was responsible for the graduate studies. So Bernard was working with teachers, professors. Up to that point, he was a guest teacher, so he had to become a full-time teacher to be the one of the leaders uh, for the graduate studies administration. He accepted his post. Finally, Bernard was full-time at Laval University. He hired four other professors. He created a equity committee. He restructured the research laboratory. He also had to manage the research tools. In 1974, he created the new group. He was promoting the language and society and knowledge of the Inuit people. He organized conferences, meetings, exhibitions to promote the development and diffusion of knowledge. He established a documentation center related to Inuit knowledge. Research scientific research was being promoted within that organization. If you want to know more about this association, I invite you to read Louis, Jacques, and Bernard, Inoxiotic, uh, half a century of studies. I wrote it in my document. 1974, Bernard left the direction. So I want to say thank you to Bernard, not just because of his uniqueness, but also for his creativity, the energy that he shared with us through his time at the Université Laval. Thank you so much. Now we have Lisa Koperqualuk. Thank you to have organized this round table in the memory of Bernard Saladin d'Anglure. I'm not here as an ex-student of Bernard, nor as his daughter. I wasn't a student of his, but he inspired me greatly. I am proud to have come here to do a master's degree, to complete a master's degree. I had many questions about my own society. I wanted to talk about shamanism. I wanted to ask, why did we all become Christians? Why did we turn our back to shamanism? When I came to Laval University, I asked to Jacques Doré because he was the one who invited me to come to Laval University. So I moved to Quebec for personal reasons. He said, sadly, Bernard Saladin d'Anglure, he's retired. But there's Frédéric Laugrand wants to be co-director. So Louis-Jacques and Frédéric became my thesis director, my two thesis directors. Bernard worked very closely with the Inuit people. Epicro? What is an epicro? It's somebody who asks so many questions, tons of questions, and just more questions. That is known that anthropologists now are just epicro. That's what Inuit people call scientists, so the people visiting them to ask them questions. So the epicro, they sit down with the community members and they talk about the Inuit laws. They talk about Inuit birds. And now they even say, I am an epic crow, that it's something to be proud of. I will do the rest of my presentation in English. I write in English better, even though I did my studies and I wrote my thesis in English, so maybe I should have written it in Inuktitut.
Donc, Koperqualuk, he would receive the publications, having been one of the persons that Bernard had interviewed in the past, as well as Louis-Jacques, I'm sure. And I would find these publications too, many years later, in my places of work, many of them in syllabics, many of them in Inuktitut. And that was when I was the communications officer at Makipik Corporation. One day, Bernard called me at this place of work regarding a formal request to Makipik to help sponsor Études Inuit Journal, which was eventually accorded a good sum. I think it was very, very helpful to the publication at that time. And this struck a relationship of professional and mentoring that I had with Bernard for until he passed away this past winter. You know, I was also happy to receive invitations from Bernard. While I was still working, he sent an invitation for his launching of the book, Être et Renaître. And little did I know how important this work was. In English, called Inuit Stories of Being and Rebirth, and Gender, Shamanism, and the Third Sex. You know, as Inuit, we're not going to look at these in an academic way, you know? I'm still questioning, well, what is the third sex? Does it really exist? You know, as an Inuk person who grows up knowing that we are brought up with names from our ancestors, and we also know that Inuit children have been brought up in the opposite sex before. And young men, little boys, could be dressed in girls' clothes, and vice versa. And still, we don't ask, like, why, you know? We took it as a part of our knowledge, as the way we grow up. Sometimes we need to step back and look at these questions. But this is what Bernard Saladin d'Anglure did, coming from a very different perspective. He delved into these questions. So I mentioned earlier, a personal reason brought me to Quebec City. It was the love of my life, and that was in 2007 I moved, and I took a leave of absence from Makipik and decided I want to continue my studies. That's when I came and began my studies. Now, fortunately, I can read French very slowly, for sure, so that's why I can't read many books in French, because I read just very slowly. But some of Bernard's works were written only in French. So happily I could, I discovered some of these articles. And there I was really able to look more profoundly at, well, who are we exactly? And what is Angakkunik? How come I don't know anything about it? Of course, there's many political reasons, religious reasons for not talking about Angakkunik. But those articles, those interviews with Inuit elders that had been done and published through Nunavut Arctic College, for example, cosmology and shamanism, those are so interesting. And I started telling myself, my new Bibles, those are my new Bibles, you know? Even Rasmussen, the publications of Rasmussen that, you know, I was introduced to at Laval University. That's my new Bible, you know? And yet when I go back up north and I talk about Angakkunik, it's like, that's a bit fad, that's boring. No, we don't want to know about that, you know? So it takes a lot of let's keep studying. Let's keep asking ourselves these questions. Why is it only Christianity has the place in our society? Those are questions we must keep asking as anthropologists too, as leaders of our communities. Yeah. And all these, like the questionings and the research, his apéro, his meticulous questioning brought to me this kind of introduction of Inuit knowledge that I had not, you know, understood as being important in our, you know, understanding of who we are. You know, we take in all and we accommodate and make space for all kinds of other knowledge. We want to learn English. We want to learn science and math and this and that. And sometimes we're forgetting that our knowledge is so important, the foundations of our knowledge. As a bachelor student, I was learning political science at Concordia University. I would learn about federalism, the Canadian Constitution. I would learn about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and global issues and so on. Then working at Makivik brought me more new knowledge, but this time it was about the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement. That's from 1975. So there, I in my place of work, I learned about, okay, what is Inuit politics? I was working for elected leaders. I was learning about government relations. These courses did not exist. Courses about these did not exist in the bachelor level at university. But I learned those in my place of work. So that's another level where we say to ourselves, we've got to bring that into the university level too, our knowledge. But researching how our Inuit communities came to be Christian, understanding the transition to Christianity from Angakkunik to Uppitunik, with Frédéric Laugrand as my co-director, that brought me again to another dimension of our knowledge, like I'm saying. As a people of the Arctic, centuries of stories, values, and culture had cemented our lives around Arctic living. These values, that knowledge, these were the foundation of the way we chose to live in the Arctic. That's our knowledge. It's the basis of why we are in the Arctic. Sometimes I find it hard to explain. But I think when we're living there, we understand. Yeah. And when you've delved into that knowledge and you question it further, you explore, you begin to understand. I think Bernard did that a lot. Yeah. We Inuit hold certain types of knowledge, that type of knowledge that originates from us, and one that has value. It has value. And I work for it to be valued equally among all other forms of knowledge. There's any other types of knowledge that cannot pretend to be superior to our type of knowledge, Inuit knowledge. And the work of Bernard was definitely a source of inspiration. Whenever I met with Bernard Saladin d'Anglure, and very often it was also with Françoise, and this would be many times over the following years after having initially met him, he would speak of Inuit and share their names. He would remember the names. Ituksakyok, Ikhaliyok, Uyarak, Koperqualuk, Salumiut, Gangsumut, George Ananak, Dumasikalak, so many he would remember. But not only their names, but their stories too. And he would, with his incredible memory, just go on and speak about his passion of Inuit knowledge and their stories and their values. So when more recently I traveled to Gangsuyuak last week, I also went to Gangsuk and I interviewed Inuit on their knowledge of birds. I'm working towards the publication of birds in Nunavik, Timmiat Nunavimmi, in Inuktitut. So I've been interviewing elders, knowledge holders, and of course asking them a little bit about their very early part of their life. One of them remembered having been born, and just remembered also just before being born, and then being born and remembering all the names and the people he was related to at his birth, because they came and welcomed him to the world. And that reminded me immediately, Bernard Saladin. But also, you know, we know of these stories within our communities. We've known of Inuit elders who remembered being fetuses and being born, going through that passage of birth. But we take it as, you know, that's who we are, you know. We're not questioning, how come we know these, how come? But when we ask these questions, we realize, well, this is very unique of Inuit. Perhaps there are other cultures who still have these memories, but this type of memory is very special and unique among Inuit. And it was Inuit from right across the whole circumpolar Arctic. Not just Nunavik, not just Nunavut. Pretty special. So it's been a very fascinating voyage, a very fascinating journey for me. Bernard has been a mentor for me. He'd invite me also to the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues while I was a student at Laval University. I went twice to that forum at the United Nations in New York, was introduced to these international issues and the importance of Inuit rights, the importance of Indigenous rights, Indigenous peoples. So this apikku saw the uniqueness of being Inuit, the uniqueness of Inuit knowledge. And while we as Inuit, we look at him as Birna apikku, many communities know him as Birna. He went first to Huakta, he went to Puvernitok, he went to other communities, and he also focused a lot in Iglulik, where, you know, his son Guillaume has grown up a lot and is known by the community. So I feel like his life's work to gain a better understanding of who we are as Inuit is a great source of inspiration for me, and I think for many other Inuit as well, for each Inuk that he had contact with and connected with and spoke with. For us, he is an inspiration, and I hope he continues to be an inspiration. Nakomi Marelo. I thought it was just rolling. So I think for last words, I'd like to say, you know, as a former student of Laval University, he loved keeping in contact. I think he was very proud, and I think Louis-Jacques too. All are very proud that there was an Inuk that went through the master's program at Laval University. I wanted to mention that too. And he kept contact. I also saw him, observed him receiving the Governor General's Order of Canada. I was very proud of that. His son was there too. Françoise was there. We've kept contact with him, and I'm also through his and Inuksutit Association's invitation, a member of Inuksutit Association. So
vice president.
I'm the vice president, yes. And by that, he's been an incredible role model for me as well. You know, today I'm also heading the organization that comes from Puvernituk, which is Tukisival Liruditsanut Parnaitit, which is a committee that does educational projects, that is also financing my bird project for publishing a Timmet Nunalimi book in Inuktitut. So that particular organization was founded by my own mother, who would have been 80 this year. And so having had that organization founded by her, and now me being president of Tukisivat Liruditsano Parnaiti, it is a real honor. But it's also a great honor to be part of Inuksutit Association that has done a lot of incredible work putting together Inuit Studies conferences and the publication of Inuit Studies that has been mentioned so graciously. So I'm just very proud to be here, bringing honor to Bernard Saladin d'Anglure. Thank you very much.
Now, we will go to next speaker. Will be Frédéric Laugrand. The title of his talk is When Chiropteran Bats Put Sex to Work. So we have to look at the screen. Hello, everyone. I'm trying to share my screen. Can you hear us, Frédéric? Yes, Caroline. I'm just trying to figure out how to share my screen. Yes, that's it, share my screen. So the button is supposed to be in the middle of your screen. I have no idea. Oh, this is annoying. I don't see. Is he authorized to? Yes, in theory, he should be authorized to. We'll try to see if we can help you from this side. I can share Well, we hear his voice. He can present. I'll share your PowerPoint because you sent it to me. Yeah, okay, it'll be quicker that way. Okay, we see you. First of all, thank you, Caroline. Oh, there it is. So thank you, Caroline Louis-Jacques, for the organization of this round table to pay tribute to Bernard, and my thoughts with Guillaume and Françoise, also with his friends. So happy to see Lisa, who was my teacher several times. Happy to see also that Lisa has a project on birds ongoing, because I'm going to speak about a type of a bird today. In many classifications, it is part of a bird family and not other animals. So this animal is not present in the Arctic. Maybe with climate change, it will be one day, but for now, it's not the case. So we see it very north in Siberia and Alaska. But one question I have first for everyone: how can you say bat in Inuktitut? I'll let you answer the question because there are specialists in the room and also on Zoom. So I was happy to hear what Lisa was doing and David. We understand that without shamanism, they would not have been able to live what they lived before the sedentarization of the population. But I chose to speak about this animal because Bernard worked on some animals. There was one about Nanook supermal, about bears, about whales, caribou. And his studies were so fascinating for both Inuit and non-Inuit population. So I'm working on a project on the relationship between humans and bats in the Australasian region on the second slide. Super interesting that the species is all over where the Australasian population, native, indigenous population is. They have cohabitated for many years. I'm passionate about this project. I won't go into detail, but simply I'll speak about the roosted flying foxes in this region. I'm wondering, are they another variant of the third sex figure that Bernard was so interested in? So the symbolic question, the details are often, as we know, the key to a system. So the flying foxes are known all over the Pacific for many reasons. They are pollinators. They are sometimes eaten, but they also carry viruses. So at the same time, they are associated to health because to consume them, to eat them, according to many testimonies that we got from Philippines, among others, gives back health, longevity, and vigor. So there's many contrasting points of view. These animals today are also threatened because 80% of them are threatened by disappearance, even though they've been around for probably 50 million years, have been through many climate crises over the years. So first question, are they vampiric? Not at all, actually. This comes from the imagination that in the West, naturalists spread. There are only 3 bat species that actually drink blood, but in the Philippines, this idea that flying foxes in Philippines do drink blood is present in the Philippines because of probably colonial and Christian history. And in the West, there is this association between the demon world, prostitution, sex, and vampirism. So, and the next slide, I have an image to show this. This is a representation from the 17th century of a bat that has both male and female parts. So this hybrid also of the mice from the 17th century. So how does this non-European bat put sex to work? So I'll start with an ethnographic mission that I did in Palo last March, where I observed the ambivalence of the flying fox. In Palo, the flying foxes, so olik, where they call it olik, is always eaten in a soup. And coconut juice, the flesh is considered delicious. That has invigorating properties for the human body, especially for men, but women eat it too. And not only Palawans eat it, the Chamorros, their neighbors, so the indigenous populations of Guam eat it even more and go to Palo to eat it because they are now protected in Guam, so forbidden for eating in Guam. These animals are featured in the Palawan myths and oral traditions. I don't have time to elaborate on this, but I'd like to speak about the parallel that we do between flying foxes and humans in this area, where their roles reverse. So songs praise the flying fox for its qualities as a good mother, capable of nursing her young and carrying them on her belly, providing them with a better protection than most birds. So nowadays, the Palawan still adopt a lot of flying foxes, a little bit like Inuits took care of baby bears. So they place them in cages behind their homes, give them names, feed them. So they domesticate them in some way. Sometimes they've left free, they recognize their name. So a detail that's interesting from Palau, the next slide shows masculine ceremonial homes. I'm going over this fast, but this is a matrilineal society in Palau. Matrilocal, but there are ceremonial homes called Bai for men as well, where they meet to speak about questions of power. What's interesting, as we see in the next slide, Caroline, please, is to see what we, the images we see on the walls. This is an upside down one because usually they hang with their head upside down. So the explanations of people that go to these ceremonial homes, it means is to force people to bow down when they enter, to inspect the discussions of the men in the homes, to show humility and respect. So animals of both sexes are represented here. Here we see a female one. And on the next slide, male one on the other side of this bay house that we can see it. So male and female are both present. So how do these animals put sex to work? So this is a quick dizzying journey to address a few questions. First, the female and gender and fertility, then masculine sex and vitality, and then a short discussion on the question. So on female gender and fertility, so female sex, excuse me, and fertility, there is an association between flying foxes and the feminine principle. In Oceania, with the Kanak people, there's a tight association between the feminine energy and these flying foxes. Since the beginning of life, the mother ties a cord made of the animal's hair to a baby's wrist to protect it from evil spells. John Guard speaks of how the female sex of the flying fox hair is taken from the lower abdomen of a pat. Upside down, it represents the female sex. It was on coins. So these shells that were coins, it was on this. And it was believed to be an object of power. Those who had it could be invisible at night, could become a dog or an owl. In Amazonia, some groups of these bats are found, and it is said that they connote to the female body. In Colombia, it is associated to female sexual organ, menstrual blood, therefore fertility and death. Rachel Delmuth explains that when a young girl is menstruating, she is described as having been bit by a bat. So they are related to sexuality, the mythical vagina dentata. They are often depicted as sexually attractive women. In Venezuela, according to Dimitri Karadimas, bats were drawn as in the shape of a vulva. In Charamawa, we also find a lot of images of bats as a bit of a joke in the sexual realm. So there's this myth that the female one cut the sexual organs of the lazy men, those that don't know how to work or build a home. I'm going over it fast, but there's all these association to the female sex, but also to the masculine sex in relation to vitality. In Papua New Guinea, in the Indonesian side, masculinity is involved on the shields here. We see them with the Camaro, their neighbors. There are rituals inspired by these bats. Some of them to promote fertility. They imitate the coitus of these bats. So a citation here, accompanying the bride receivers, they initiate climb ladders top of the roof and hang on with their hands and feet. The bad dignitary at the top of the roof sings to them, "What are you doing there? You're finishing the fruit." There's a list of fruits. He strikes the roof with a stick, to chase away the bats. They fall and are caught by the bride receivers, who make sure that the initiates are not injured. So it's a ritual. So when the flying fox attacks the fruit, it shows their masculine qualities, their sexual organs, male sexual organs that are have an impressive look. It's close to luxury and bestiality. So many anthropologists mention that in some populations, they are agents to the origins of sexes. Another quote, "It is not the sun, but a woman that pierced a man's sexual organs, impaling it. In so much pain, he grabbed a piece of bamboo and hit the women's sexual organs. Some women still wear pieces of this bark through their nose. So this is used in many initiations. Gabelem. the flying foxes, they represent penises, but in an androgynous way. In the houses of the Abraham, they say it features both penises and pendulous breasts, therefore evoking both masculinity and femininity. Other ethnologists have expanded on this interpretation. Christian Coiffier, for example, he rightly points out that Morin make dishes that highlight these exceptional sexual characteristics of the bats.
Then you have these two. They are the real mother of each person. We have the characteromorphosis. It represents the human in the form of bats. These bats would symbolize a primordial status of both genders. Next picture. We have a picture of Christian Coiffier. And it shows that you can see the two sexes depending on the angle that you're looking at it. It is very difficult to see. You have the lower legs, the penis, and then the head. You can look at it from both ways. So what would be the gender before gender? I have so many details to give you, but I'm running out of time. So these details are fascinating to me, and I hope we can I could pursue this conversation with Bernard, even though that he is no longer with us. The Mary Cetron's reading on the androgyny of these animals is among the most interesting, most perspectivist, varying the gaze and interpretation according to position and gender of the beholder. In the West world, these bats are blurring the lines between men and women, between the earth and the sky, between animals walking and flying. The immune system and contagious disease. These bats are everything at the same time. To end on a Shemitic note, I'm going to say something in Buryat language. Robert Hamayon, another friend from Bernard, these bats disobey. They never obey. And that's why in many mythologies around the world, bats have this special status in their culture. In Buryat, it means that it is a being that is never under any authority. This is the end. No more sound? I do not hear you anymore. There we go. We fixed the mistake. Now the very last communication with Caroline, Hervé, and Valentine Ribadeau-Dumas. They will talk about a virtual project and the memory of the memory of objects. Okay, here we go. Hello, everyone. At the beginning of his career, as you mentioned, Bernard was very interested in the material legacy of Inuit people. He also understood the progressive integration and sedentarization of the Inuit was going to disappear a huge part of their history of their culture, the way of living. And that's why he started a collection that he gave in 2018. He gave this collection to Laval University when he was making that collection. He worked, so that's over many, many years, as you said, over 30 years teaching at Laval University and involved. He was also very close to the Inuit people, different networks. I know we're short on time, so I'm trying to go a little faster, but as an introduction, it's very difficult. All these objects that were collected by Bernard that we're going to see again today, all virtually, there will be this virtual museum, and we want to thank the creativity of the Inuit people, the rich legacy, and also be thankful of the work of Bernard. This virtual exhibition is quite interesting, and I believe Valentine is going to explain to us. Valentine is online. Beyond the physicality of these objects, we want to give the story of each of these objects. There are many stories related to all these objects, and we're going to develop many of them. Let me find my notes. The exhibition of Bernard Saladin has 354 objects, mostly objects in their daily lives, clothing, items, tools for sewing, also for taking care of their own health. We have toys, we have tools for hunting, more ceremonial tools, mostly from the Nunavik, from Igloolik mostly. But actually we have 140 objects from Nunavut. And other places. But there are many objects that we do not know where exactly they were collected. We have some artifacts from the first half of the 20th century. Many of these objects were built or created following Bernard's request. In the 1960s or 70s, many of these objects were created. Many of these objects were actually copied. They were never used. They were created often by the last generation of people that lived in igloos, and they used duck sleds to move around. And often Bernard had a relationship with these people, with these artists and experts. This collection is fragile. is difficult to move around because of the materials themselves. We have many clothing items that were made of fur from different animals. We have 14 item clothes with feathers. We have others from marine animals. At the beginning, it was held in in a refrigerator or a freezer, but because of humidity, so as I said, Bernard gave his collection to Université Laval. Sadly, we have an insect infestation, and we had to treat many of these objects. The totality of all these objects were wrapped and then stored and for 25 days in a room that was at minus 25 degrees Celsius. They were put in different containers with little boxes, as you can see on the slide. In 2017, we had a physical exhibition. This project started with the exhibition service of the Library of Laval University among an affiliation with the sociology faculty. The approach was a theoretical one and it was based on Bernard's teaching. Here you can see the physical exhibition. We looked at a three-dimensional approach. We divided the exhibition into like the infrahuman, the human scale, and the superhuman scale. I'm going to give the mic to Valentine to tell us more about this virtual museum project. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Yes, we can hear you. Perfect. So, Caroline, if you can go to the next slide, I'm going to discuss the second part of this project. We have this library. We wanted to give access to as many people as possible to this collection. Because most of these objects are from Igloolik, we looked at the community, the Igloolik's community first. The planification was very difficult. We had many obstacles we had many obstacles, but we believe that our efforts were important. We had financial support of the university for this project. At first, we had to answer the easy question, is this going to be interesting to the Inuit people? And if it is interesting, then how can we collaborate and to build this virtual museum? We had 5 different trips. Quickly here, you can see the 5 trips. 3 at Eagle Licks and 2 in Quebec City. You will have more information of like what object had what signification. So the first 3 trips were with objects. We had to rebuild this link between the University, and the Igloo-Limute. Let's go to the next slide. First trip in 2022, May 2022, we went to Igloo Lake. We were looking at, is there an interest in the community? These objects were now helping to have a conversation, to start a conversation, because it was a curiosity for the people there.
There were many recommendations by the ULaval that allowed us to travel with them. There was a lot of curiosity attracted to this. Many of the artisans were known in the community. To see the object again, to recreate this link, it was a real catalyst for a lot of reactions. Probably in link with the fact and with all humility that we were keep going back and forth between Guillaume's house and the college with this two mysterious, pulling on the sled, two mysterious large red boxes. People were wondering what we were doing, actually, with these mysterious boxes. Finally, two organizations wanted to get involved in the project, Nunavut Arctic College and Igloo Lake and the Igloo Lake High School. So they wanted to create a website to promote their culture and transfer the knowledge from elders to younger people to have a long-term permanent tool for this. So the project was used to create this digital tool to transmit knowledge to youth. This knowledge of Inuit culture. I'll speak about this more later. There was a second trip in Quebec City. 3 Igloo Inuit came to the Université Laval, Deborah Karnak and Nathalie Koperqualuk, as well as Roland Taktuk, an interpreter. They came to start the work of documenting objects and to record audio and video testimonies for the future of the virtual museum. Interesting to note that Deborah is the daughter of Nora Pritut, and Nathaniel is the son of Nicolas Kubak, an artisan and one of the main informants of Bernard. So these objects were connected to memories and childhood anecdotes of their parent using these objects. So they wanted to share this to conserve this knowledge. There was a third trip with these objects and included in November 2022 to continue discussion with the community, to document testimonials, the audio and video ones, to feed the virtual museum. The last two trips quickly were more for post-production, namely by our main contributor, Jacqueline of the Nunavut College. He worked on all steps of the project. The last steps were done for this. A few key figures quickly, simply to show the different formats of the meetings, because that's what we're focusing on today. So there were workshops in schools with elders, community workshops with municipal authorities. We understand with these numbers and these journeys, we created relationships between the different teams of ULaval, of course, with the collections, the libraries, anthropologists. So there were collaborators in Igloo Lake that supported us, including Guillaume, in our approach to develop this. There were partners, the Nunavut Arctic College, the Igloo-Limute participants that accepted to share on the website. And finally, the relationships with the Igloo that wanted to share their knowledge and the school teachers for the young people in the high school. So these objects were and still are used to create relationships between generations on many levels. For example, so there were elders brought to Quebec cities with Bernard and Françoise. These, I remind you, they're descendants of the artisans that created these objects, so they worked with Bernard. So there were links between generations created with elders in these workshops that were physically present during the workshops, but also with audio and video clips that are on the website. Here is a picture of a workshop that I hosted last March in Igloolik, where the youth from the school, they discovered the testimonies on site. And finally, I created relationship between elders and youth. They participated to honor the memory of their elders by sharing their childhood memories and by transmitting knowledge to the younger generations. There are also relationships between generations of anthropologists. The collection comes from Bernard, who was a professor emeritus at ULaval, Caroline, who is now a teacher at ULaval, and Marie-Pierre Thibault, and myself, who were at the time master's students at ULaval in anthropologies. It also created some relationships between generations. Guillaume will speak more of this, but also a relationship in the Saladin family, the Saladin Dogo, because the children of Guillaume also saw these objects during our first trip there. These objects brought us into an intimacy of certain families. These objects belong to their parents, their ancestors, grandparents, and all this starting with Bernard's family. So the circulation of these objects and their handling was a determining factor in building collaboration in the growing and reciprocal enrichment of the relationship. These objects sometimes brought anger in some, because the fact that the objects were brought by white anthropologists brought back memories by a certain period, certain political, colonial policies, and a very extractivist period in anthropology. So ULaval was open to requesting an official return of these objects. But what was also interesting is that they were a meeting point for different perspectives about the objects themselves. With the university team, Valérie Boulva and her team were very concerned by the proper conservation of these precious museal objects. They are, as you see, conserved and transported in a very prudent way. But once in Igloolik, we realized quickly that Inuit saw them rather as tools rather than artifacts. Which is usually more of a museum definition. Youth were also wondering what the tools were, because they did not know them, wondering also what would be their purpose today, as they were perhaps no longer useful. Many mentioned they seemed that they were small, or seemed they were never used, but it's normal, because Bernard had ordered their production just for the sake of it. But it was interesting to just study their use, their perspectives, but others found they looked dirty, or they would say, I have a newer one at home that looks better, and they offered to give or sell it to us. Finally, what was particularly interesting Another aspect of this project was to see that the complex conservation of these objects required manipulating them with gloves, which here is not a method that is practiced and understood. So it's not always obvious to explain this to Igloo Limute, where their father or grandfather created these objects, and we have to tell them to use gloves to touch it and to also ask them to not to use it anymore. So with a lot of humor, our elders were asked to manipulate them in Quebec City. We saw that it is also with the body that we learn and teach. This is a demonstration of a game of force. Nathalie told us often that he would be careful, but it was Nathalie knew, so he said he would be careful, but it was important to explain how it worked physically. To conclude, we really wanted to share a video about ceremonial masks that are used in the Tivayu game, which is a kind of a funny practice that can be to spook people out, to explain how people interacted during the workshops. So he's asking if he can try it. Someone is saying that they're scared to touch it. So finally, to conclude, the website mondeinuit.com will be launched at the end of the year in December 2025 or January 2026 as a result of these meetings between generations. It's aimed to scientists, to stakeholders in the North, the young Inuit, the general public who want to better understand Inuit societies. One of its main objectives is to become an educational tool used in the schools of Nunavut. Something that many teachers in Igloolik expressed as their wish during our last visit there. As Caroline said, the objective is to honor Bernard's work and the richness of Inuit culture. So Caroline will do the concluding remarks. To conclude, these objects that were collected in the 60s in Nunavik or Nunavut have a real social life. To use famous words of famous anthropologists, they considered as witnesses to a way of life that was dying out. They were made at Bernard's request as a form of ethnographic collection, as was still customary a few decades ago. So they show how they can create relationships between generations. We made them accessible to a greater public, but particularly to young Inuits. So we're impatient to launch the website. It's being translated into Inuktitut at the moment. So I will end here.